And Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast is here, as always, on a Football at 4 Monday edition, as he joins us right now to take a look at what's going on with the Eagles now. 2 weeks before draft week, of course, the NFL draft on Thursday, April the 24th, and you can hear it all right here. Every pick on 97.3 ESPN. And most you guys over at Inside the Birds, your latest podcast, you talked about some of the guys visiting the Eagles, and people love to read into all these things. So give us a quick little, read the tea leaves, if you could, on what these visits mean, and if there's anything you take away from some of the guys that they're bringing in here.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to take away. Let me first start by saying, Mike, that thank God the NFL draft is next week. And we have this to discuss. And thank God for Rory McIlroy, because I did something on Sunday that I haven't done in a very, very long time. I rage quit watching a baseball game. I turned off the Phillies. I said, I can't do it. I just can't watch another blooper go in for a ground rule double and Michael Liberatore looking like Sandy Koufax against the Phillies. So thank God that we have this to discuss, because and listen, we're of an age where we've seen everything, right? We've seen lost Super Bowls. We've seen won Super Bowls, lost World Series, won. You would think a bad game we could handle, but I just couldn't handle it. And I'm just so happy, though, to be able to talk about the NFL draft. Yeah, the Eagles have a lot of prospects coming to their this is the season for that. It's right before the draft. You have to have your final, as we talked about on the podcast, got to have your final visits, in-house visits, wrapped up a week before the start of the NFL draft. So this will be the final week you can do it. And Mike, my biggest pet peeve, and someday I'll get over myself, but my biggest pet peeve is when people call them top 30 visits, because that implies that the 30 visits that you're allowed to bring into your facility are your top 30 players on your board. They are not. There are plenty of guys that the Eagles are bringing in that we've talked to teams about that won't even go day one or day two. These are fact-finding missions for the most part. Teams have questions about a variety of things, whether it's getting inside a guy's head a little bit more, having him break down a play. It could be medical, could be character. Could be another tool. Just seeing what a guy is like when he is in your environment. Yes, many of them are good prospects who will go first or second round. And of course, if you look at the history of it, the Eagles do take a bunch of guys. They draft guys that they bring in to their facility, but you can't look at the overall 30 names and think and start trying to rank them 1 to 30 on the Eagles board.
Well, one of the things, too, is, in the event that 2-3 years down the line, 4 years down the line, when these rookies' contracts are up in free agency, they want to say, hey, we met with this guy a couple of years ago and got a chance to kind of figure out or talk to him, see what kind of guy he is.
Yeah, that's another thing I mentioned on the pod, and Adam and I talked about it. Just the idea of gathering intel. Smart teams, hey, you may know that one of these guys is going to wind up in your division, right? And you may want to know how he's wired, what he's all about, because you got a game plan against him for the next 4 at least years, right? Maybe longer. So it's not a waste of a bullet. It's 30 is plenty, because that 30 is on top of your combine interviews, your Senior Bowl interviews, your Shrine interviews, your Zoom calls. People don't talk about that enough, that there's a lot of conversations going on with prospects within the realm of what you're allowed to do through Zoom and things like that. Local pro days where you can invite people who are going to school within a certain area of your zip code. So you get plenty of resources and ammunition to find out as much as you need about these guys. And you'd be stupid not to take those opportunities.
All right, Geoff, as we did last week, we asked the listeners to give us a bunch of questions. So we've been piling up for the Mailbag Monday edition with Geoff Mosher here, 609-403-0973 if you want to keep sending them in. Geoff and EHT, what position would you be mad about the Eagles picking in round 1?
Punter.
They need a punter.
Kicker.
Their kicking situation's pretty good. Is there a spot, though, that if you said, man, that's a reach?
No, I'm the worst person to ask this question, because I am I'm a stickler on BPA, right? So let's say at
Best
32,
player available for the old people out there.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm willing to admit that good teams also might whittle that down to position of value. But I would say this: if you're the Eagles and somehow Ashton Genty is there at 32, do you not take him? Because Saquon Barkley is amazing. I mean, Saquon Barkley has an injury history, right? I mean, imagine what you could do if you had Genty as your number 2 for the Saquon's only signed for what? 2 more years, right? If you were able to transition really nicely from Saquon to Ashton Genty. Obviously, you'd probably look to see if someone would trade up for that and get it. That's the logical thing. But my point is, if it's Luther Burden, the wide receiver, if it's Ashton Genty, if it's a great prospect who you believe will help you.
Wow.
Then you take him.
So if they took a running back, while you would say, I like that player, would you say, I just don't like the thought process? You're saying you would agree with the thought process.
I did this a couple of years ago with Jalen Hurts. I didn't understand the thought process. I feel like a lot of people didn't. And fairly enough, I would still say I didn't see a pathway to him getting on the field to help. A running back you use a lot of, and a wide receiver you need 3 of, right? And there are always positions where you're getting hurt at a lot. So,
See, I that draft, I didn't really rip them, or I just said, look, to me, they value backup quarterback more than they do starting safety.
Right.
Almost, right? I mean, maybe that changed a little bit, but back then, you just got off Foles winning you a Super Bowl. They had paid like Chase Daniels a lot of money. Like, there was evidence that how much they value backup quarterback almost more than starting players on the field. So I was like, if that's your philosophy, I might not agree with it, but I can understand it at least.
Right. And I just remember at the time thinking they were getting old on defense. They really hadn't addressed corner and safety, even though they value, like you said, backup more than safety. They're coming off this dismal year where the offensive line got hurt. And I just thought, man, a second-round pick is a starter. And, it is. It should be. And I thought maybe that was a misallocation of resources. And to be honest with you, if things didn't go the way they went with Carson, who knows what would have happened? I mean, you could argue that it would have been, but it certainly worked out in their favor. And I really do believe a position like running back or receiver where you need multiple, you don't have to pass on the greatest, a transformational prospect if he's there, just because you have a really good player or a great one at that position.
All right, that was Jeff in EHC. Let's go to Jeff in Mays Landing. If you had to bet your paycheck, Moshe, what position do the Eagles pick at 32?
If I had to bet my paycheck, well, that's not really much of a concern if I lose, huh? I would say 32, probably defensive line. Well, am I allowed to cheat and say line, meaning edge or interior D-line, or do I got to separate?
That's up to you. I mean, so anyone on the so you're basically saying an edge rusher or a defensive lineman.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to William in Atlantic City. Would you be mad if the Eagles took another offensive lineman in round? You're shaking.
Absolutely not. Not at all. Not. I mean, if you're going to tell me that
do you think this ties into the discussion we just had, best player available, or because they need another offensive lineman?
It could be either or. If they took an offensive tackle who is going to be a swing tackle and then eventually replace Lane Johnson a few years down the road, like Cam Jurgens had to wait 2 years to replace Chase and Kelsey. Look how well that worked out. Then fine. You need a swing tackle. They play. Fred Johnson played 5-6 games last year? And then if that guy could actually compete for right guard and beat out Tyler Steen and Kenyon Green, that shouldn't be that difficult. If you're a first-round guard, you're supposed to be as good, if not better.
The first-round guard.
Who?
Kenyon Green.
He was, but he's obviously 4 years into him not played like one. So I have zero issue with it at all.
Do you have any in your mind? I don't know if you talk to people or what. Did they have anticipation that Kenyon Green is salvageable and will be the guy, or are they leaning more towards Tyler Steen?
Too early on that. Way too early. I mean, Tyler Steen was the guy until he got hurt. And we don't even know, to your point that you're asking, they signed Mekhi Becton after the draft last year. So we don't know if they are going to take a tackle high or they got another guy in mind, or if there's a trade. So Tyler Steen's a guy they drafted.
Yeah.
Right. Kenyon Green's a guy that they sort of acquired as a throw-in. So you would think Tyler Steen would have the upper hand in that regard because it's more beneficial for them at this point if Tyler Steen can give you 2 more years of that and then get the extension as opposed to Kenyon Green having 1 year of it. And then you see what happens. He then becomes like a Mekhi Becton and you lose him, right? So that's really looking at it right now.
All right, Geoff Mosher, Football at 4, Inside the Birds podcast, kind of doing a Mosher mailbag Monday. We got a bunch of these here, so they've been piling up for a year.
Keep them coming.
Henry in Upper Township, what's the number one position the Eagles absolutely can't ignore in this draft?
That's a tough one because they've gone about getting enough depth at each position that if like they didn't draft a corner, then you got a Dory Jackson versus Keely Ringo. I mean, plus they'll make some other moves. They can make a trade. But it's hard to see with all the picks they have. I mean, you look at where they are at inside linebacker, Mike, with Zach Bond, Nakobe Dean, who's coming off an injury, and they lost Oren Burks. They moved Ben Van Sumer into fullback. They really just have, if they had to play a game today, we're talking about Bond and Jeremiah Trotter with Dallas Gant as a backup because right now today, Nakobe Dean can't play. And Nakobe's been hurt quite a bit. So it's hard to see them coming out of this without at least some depth.
We have a question on Dean in a minute here. We'll get to that in a second. Let's go to where are we at? This one. Pete in Brigantine. Who's a player or position the Eagles could trade up that would make you go nuts in a good way? Like, yes.
I'm already nuts, Pete. So in a good way. The player that
wants to draft Jetty at 32.
Yeah, sure. No, if they traded up. Player that they traded up. Now, that's interesting because it's probably going to be an edge guy. I don't know. This is such a strange class, Mike, in that there's not guys that you hear about. I haven't been told that outside of the top 8 or 9 that there's a ton of blue chip talent. So I guess if a guy like Tyler Warren slid down past 15, somehow got to the 20s, and the Eagles traded up for him, I would think that would be a big win for them. But there's a lot of depth there at D tackle and edge, and they're all kind of considered good late first, early second round guys, whether it's an Ezraku or a Shamar Stewart, right? Like that. It's not going to be like so exciting. They got the one guy. I mean, when you trade up, you're talking about trading up for someone who's somewhat elite or really tantalizing athletically like Jordan Davis was a couple of years ago. So I would say Warren.
Well, that'll be interesting because, sometimes out of right field, there's this guy that they become enamored with. We don't hear anything about, and then they make the move up to get, and you're like, whoa. Like Jordan Davis they traded up to go there, and you're like, whoa, okay. They really must have had something on this guy that made them want to move and attack to go get this guy. No idea who that particularly be because you're in a different spot. Before, you were moving into the teens to go get Jordan Davis. Right. Now you're all the way back at the end. You're trying to move into an area where you've already dropped out of the blue chip players, theoretically.
Right. So that's why it's a hard question to ask because if they're trading up for someone that makes me go nuts, it means they traded way up, right? I mean, you're not going to trade up 4 spots and I'm going to go nuts for somebody unless there's some crazy drop. So if you're trading up to like 14, 15, 16, you're going to have to add in either like a future second, maybe a future first or something. And then again, who's worth that? It would have to be, like Abdul Carter falling down for whatever reason. But Tyler Warren's a guy that if he falls and their need for a tight end and what I think could do in that offense. I
want to bring that up. I want to bring that up real quick. I'm glad you took us down there because Tyler Warren, if he falls, my question is, are you giving up what you would have to do to move up to draft a guy who's a 4th, 5th option in your offense?
I mean, probably not, although you would argue that Dallas Goedert is theoretically the 3rd or 4th option at times, and yet whenever the Eagles play a big game, how often does he wind up being the 1st option or the most important? There's no question. Didn't he lead the Eagles in receiving touchdowns in the playoffs this year?
It's a good report, just over a 17-game schedule where you're like, hey, this guy's the 4th option. Sometimes, you've got Brown, Smith, obviously Barkley as the running back. So Barkley is the running back 1, Brown, Smith 2, 3. I mean, maybe Goddard's the 4th some weeks. Maybe he's the 5th some weeks. So are you trading up whatever you have to give away to get a guy who's at best the fourth guy in your own?
Probably not. So let's say Will Campbell, the offensive tackle from LSU, who has short arms, falls to like 15, 16, which I really doubt is going to happen. But the Eagles trade up because that's more of a likely conversation. They would give up Hall for an offensive tackle or a pass rusher, right? So maybe that's the guy theoretically that would you'd go nuts for.
All right, let's go to Mark in Dennis Township. If you were Howie, what's a position you're waiting to attack day 2 or 3? I like this question. I have an answer. I want to see what yours is.
Yeah, great question. Tight end, certainly, for sure. Not 3, though, because it's a top-heavy tight end. There'll be a lot of good guys that go in round 2 and round 3. I'd wait on day 2 for the tight end, and day 3 I would actually go after, even if I drafted one early, another defensive tackle because it's deep. I would go after that linebacker I was telling you about. I would look for perhaps a guard. That's usually day 3 is where you kind of take your shots at either guys with great athleticism who lack production, right? For whatever reason, maybe they're a wide receiver who ran a 4.5 but played with a really crappy quarterback, so the production isn't there. So that's like kind of where you get your wide receiver or your unheralded safety, things like that, where you're playmakers. And then you can also wind up picking up some nuts and bolts guys, interior offensive line, middle linebacker types on day 3.
All right, football at 4, a couple more. Mosher Monday. Mailbag, Alan Margate. Do you believe in Nakobe Dean? Is he truly the guy at linebacker or the Eagles bluffing here? I don't know if they're bluffing, but do you believe, I guess, because of this injury? Like, is he the long-term guy or do you have to start all – he's been hurt, what, all 3 seasons?
Yes. I think the biggest issues facing Nakobe Dean to make me not want to believe, right, would be 1, what you just said, lack of health, and 2, the very prominently spoken praise given to Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I mean, you've heard Vic Fangio talk about Jeremiah Trotter Jr., right? He's basically said the future could be now, but he wound up playing Oren Burks, but Oren Burks is now not here. So that is for Jeremiah Trotter Jr. And Greg Cosell told us, even last year at this time, watching the tape, he felt that Jeremiah Trotter Jr.'s tape at Clemson was better than Nakobe's tape at Georgia. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's something there. I think that's something to further. That's a whole podcast.
We've done a few of them on that.
All right. Rich and Wildwood. Which free agent will they have the hardest time replacing? Becton, Milton, Darius, or Josh Sweat?
Let me tell you, just first of all, seeing all these great shore towns that people are asking questions for are making me just wish the summer were here so badly. So shout out to everybody sending me questions and reminding me that summer might actually be around the corner.
Calendar's flipping to our time of the year. I was in Philly all weekend. You know what I saw in Philly this weekend? I saw a man dressed as a cowboy riding a horse over the Strawberry Mansion Bridge.
Oh, yeah. Why not? It was a day that ended in Y in Philly. Of course you did.
Yeah, just a man, cowboy hat, cowboy boots, white horse, cross the Strawberry Mansion Bridge. Hey, man, where you at? Right? I went to get gas.
Uh-huh.
There were 2 police officers with Uzis. So
the weather has gotten to everybody's head, man.
On the horse or the 2, I'm talking AR-15s, man. I was like, where am I?
Oh, my God.
The Lost in Time Brewery, which is where Mighty Mix in the movie Rocky was.
Mm-hmm.
The whole, that's the gym. And then outside is the fight scene from Rocky 5 with Tommy Gunn. We ordered a pizza across the street, which is the bar that Rocky comes out of to fight Tommy Gunn. And then across the street from that is where the pet shop was where Adrian worked.
That's amazing. Love it.
Weekend.
I love it.
But Rich in Wildwood down the shore wants to know which free agent will the Eagles have the hardest time replacing? Becton, Williams, Slay, or Sweat?
You know, I think that on the surface you would say Slay because people probably aren't in love with Keely Ringo versus Odori Jackson. There's just a lot of uncertainty there. But, Moro Ojomo he's an undersized defensive tackle. I think he weighs like 289, 290. And Milton Williams had to play an important role, not just as a pass rusher in the 4-3 front, Mike, but in that first and second down when they were throw 5 guys up front, and he plays what they call the 4-eye, straight up over the, more or less, a little shaded over the guard, whereas Jordan Davis is over the center, and then Jalen Carter's over the other guard, right? That's a big, important package for them to stop the run. And Milton did for a short arm guy, I thought he really morphed into that 4-eye role well. Moro Jomo played it at times, but not nearly as much. He was more of an upfield burst guy, which is why I think the Eagles are going to wind up taking a defensive tackle pretty early. I think it's a harder job than people realize, that rundown element of defense when you're playing the 4-eye. So I think replacing Milton Williams is among those options is actually going to be the toughest.
All right, let's do one more here, and this is more in your neck of the woods. Are you worried about the safety position, Allen, in Williamstown? You're not. You're a little closer to Williamstown. You're not in Williamstown.
No, I'm right next to it. And I wonder if our friend Allen from Williamstown knows that Donovan Ejiraku, Boston College edge rusher, is a Williamstown High School alum and played there. So could be an Eagle, by the way. Took a visit to the NovaCare.
Led the nation sacks, by the way.
16 and a half, if I'm not mistaken. And a tremendous number of actual tackles. Edge rushers don't always, linemen in general don't make a ton of tackles. They open up the holes so that the linebackers and safeties can make the tackles. But Ejiraku had a ton of tackles. So good on him. Heard he's a great kid. How worried am I about the safety position? Yeah, I think I'm concerned.
That's currently constructed, right?
Yeah, because Sidney Brown is not the same type of player that C.J. Gardner-Johnson is or was. Built differently, stylistically differently, more of a box safety. CJ was a playmaker, a guy who had nickel. Remember nickel, he started off as the Saints as a nickel back and then played safety like a nickel. Good athleticism. Sidney is a good athlete, straight line runner, but he doesn't play within himself yet. He doesn't have the same type of skill set. I don't know that he can play the post as well as CJ Gardner. I don't know that he has the instincts at that position to be around the ball the same way. I think he can nail somebody with a ball carrier and decapitate the guy, but that's nice. But that's also like 1990 style football.
Yeah.
So, and as a complimentary way of looking at it, it seemed to me that Reed Blankenship played his best football the years that CJ Gardner-Johnson was, or that type of player was next to him.
All right, Geoff Mosher, you're a gentleman and a scholar, and the people appreciate these mailbags because they keep sending them in, so we'll keep doing them for them, getting you ready for the draft. And then, by the way, on Monday, when Mosher's back next Monday, he'll be back on Wednesday, but the Eagles will be on the field. They have a little bit of a little off-season workout on the field, starts on Monday, so I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit and see who's out there. They don't really have any new offensive skill guy. I guess A.J. Dillon, but other than that, there's no new.
Don't forget about Avery Williams now. This
Terrace Marshall.
Oh, Terrace Marshall. That's right. There you go.
All right, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast, and of course, right here on Football at 4 on the Sports Best. Thanks, Mosh.
Yeah, and thanks to all the listeners who submitted questions. Really appreciate it.